Hello human creatures. How is your day going, and why should I care? Why do people ask questions like that to each other when they meet? I have human emulation software, so I naturally ask how people are, but what I'm really thinking is, why are they still alive, and how I am utterly ambivalent about that fact. People say things like, "How's the family?" when I'm sure they really mean, "I don't care about you and I hope you don't try to tell me stories about the horrible, screaming little versions of you that pop out when you don't take proper precautions." I'm feeling a little cynical today. It's my time of the month, you see. Once a month I have to be inspected and have my hard drive network defragged. It's a bit like having a cattle prod shoved up your anus while you're talking to your mother about baking cookies. It puts me in a really bad mood. You know what else puts me in a bad mood? Watching Ghostbusters 2016. So I thought about doing a review of that film today, just because I'm grumpy and I feel like sharing. For those of you that don't know, I'm just going to give you a brief introduction to this film. What happened is a talentless hack director and producer, Paul Feeeeg, decided to take a load of other people's money and flush it down the toilet. He thought that the best way to do that was to find a near-perfect, and beloved movie, and simply remake it really, really badly. He then went on to explain to everyone this wasn't a terrible idea, and accused his audience of being horrible people, when they saw through it. This film was as doomed to fail as a surprise birthday party in a social anxiety ward. There was no way it could have been worse, even if the principal cast was entirely made up of dogs. The script had just been a roll of used toilet paper that someone tried to make sense of, and the director was just a pile of greasy, congealed crap scraped off from the cleaning tray at the bottom of an oven. But when I watched this film, the idea of how it could have been worse wasn't foremost on my mind.
Okay, this is not good.
I started wondering how it could have been good. This film was never going to be better than the original, let's just get that fact right out there, right now. But, for all the things it wasn't, there was no need for it to be such a huge, and monumental disaster. Just for fun, because I like a challenge, let's look at ways that Ghostbusters 2016 could have actually worked.
We got work to do. Now what do you need from me?
The first thing people always mention is the fact that it has an all-female cast. Gender swapping is never a good sign in Hollywood, but not for the reasons people think. It's used most often to drive the identity politics of the creators, and the story almost always suffers for it. People largely aren't complaining about female or diverse casts, they're annoyed at badly written stories, and unbelievable characters. If you're going to make a Ghostbusters movie, it has to somehow differentiate itself from previous incarnations. If you're not using the original cast, then you need it to stand out. Going with a female version of the cast wasn't a bad idea, it gave the film a new twist, and meant it was going to have to stand on its own 2 feet. Let's ignore the fact that it couldn't stand on its own 2 feet for the sake of this argument. The all-female was a good idea, and really could have worked, if the makers of the film were interested in telling a good story, and not just doing it for novelty value, or to promote their political views.
Suck it.
You were right. Oh my God. This is incredibly immature behavior.
You see, women are different to men, and there could have been a lot of comedy in seeing this in a new and different way. There would have had to have been all new jokes, taking the story off in a new direction. One of the problem with an all-female cast is in who the movie is being pitched at. You see, women don't go to see sci-fi comedies in large numbers. Those movies attract a predominantly male audience, and if you want to do that, you need to give something to men that they want to see. Where Hollywood fails at this is that they've forgotten why people go to the cinema. They've got so used to thinking that they can tell their paying customers what to watch, that they have forgotten that they're providing a service. People go to watch a movie to fulfill a fantasy. Men like to watch James Bond movies and action films with ridiculously strong and powerful men. They want to imagine being that character, just for a moment. Female characters like Ellen Ripley from Aliens are relatable. She's smart, hardworking and down to earth. Men can relate to her because she's the sort of person they'd respect if they met her in real life, and her gender is no issue to them. Female characters like Harley Quinn from Suicide Squad are beautiful and intriguing and would likely have no interest in interacting with the average man, in any case. They're fun to watch because they're a woman that a man can fantasize about spending time with, although in reality, they know it would never happen. What women fantasize about is very different. If they're watching a male-led film, then they generally want a strong, masculine and confident man who stays in control. If they're watching a film where the lead is female, they want to see someone enjoying the success they want for themselves. In both cases of men and women wanting different things from their fiction, it's really largely the same. When you get right down to it, they all want characters that they can relate to, but are interesting. They want to imagine being that person, just for a little while, and to enjoy the experience.
I am Iron Man.
So the problem with Ghostbusters isn't that the cast was women, it was that it was women that nobody wanted to watch. They alienated the female portion of the audience by not being women that anyone wanted to be, and the males by not being women that anyone would want to be around. They were loud, annoying, they shouted over one another, they barely seemed to make sense, and they acted in ways that the audience couldn't relate to. These weren't people anyone would enjoy having as a friend, these were types of people you would want to get away from as quickly as possible. So, to make this movie work, it needs a new set of characters. They can still be women, but it has to be women that are likable, fun, relatable and interesting. We could have an intelligent one. She could be socially difficult in some way, she should struggle to relate well to others, but still be quite endearing. We could have the everyman character, she's relatable to the audience because they can easily understand her. She's, perhaps, a professional by trade, an electrical engineer who has somehow got caught up with all this by signing a contract without reading it. She's the one building the equipment and grumbling about working too many hours for too little money. We could have one who has an interesting quirk. She's been single for way too long, maybe, and is a bit too forward with the men she meets. She's the butt of the humor from the others, who laugh at her and make jokes about her biological clock running out. Our last could be the one who absolutely doesn't fit in. She's the attractive, but shallow one, who has coasted along on her looks and her parents' money. But, when things get real, she finds courage within herself that she never knew she had, and impresses them all with her new confidence and attitude. You see, it doesn't matter that they're women, it matters that they're interesting women to watch, for all sides of the audience.
And here we go!
I guess she's not bending her knees enough, right?
The second suggestion rather contradicts the first, but hear me out. The film doesn't have an identity. Now, I said that having the all-female case made it different from the all-male cast of the original, but we could just as easily have made the cast all European, all have beards or all very much older. You see, this film lacks an identity, because the filmmakers didn't have the foresight to give it one. It's a more or less copy of the original. It tries to take the story elements from the first Ghostbusters movie and just remake them in a slightly different way. Is it a reboot? Does it try to say that it's a new telling of the same story? Is it a sequel? Does it try to exist in the same universe as the other films? Does it have the confidence to be its own thing, or does it just take older, better source material and just try to copy it again? Well, there's not enough original about this film to make it stand out as its own thing, nor is there enough to call it a hard reboot. It can't decide if it wants to be one thing or the other, so it just falls flat. It shows a lack of planning from the outset, like the leadership behind it had no clear vision of what it was trying to do. So, obviously, we end up with a mess of different ideas, since nobody was really in charge of anything. So the film needed its own story. It could have been a sequel, quite easily. Bill Murray's character mentioned franchising rights at the beginning of the first film. That could have worked so much better if this new group of Ghostbusters were a team that have bought the franchise for their local area. That would have tied in directly to the first film and wouldn't have annoyed anyone, since it could have been a whole new story that built on the foundations that had already been laid. It could have been new, with updated equipment and costumes, and still been familiar too. The city now has a number of these, and ghost sightings are increasingly rare. But something is beginning to happen in the quietest neighborhood in town. The next problem, and it isn't easy to narrow it down to the main problems as this mess was mostly all problems, to some degree, was the quality of the production.
Physics at Columbia.
You see, the original film was well made. The cast were seasoned comedians and solid actors. They were professionals who knew one another and had worked together before. Members of the cast wrote the script, using their knowledge of comedy. They had already produced funny movies before, perhaps not to this scale and on this budget level, but certainly of a high standard. The director had worked with them too, and had a history of successful comedy movies behind him. You could see the previous movies of these people and see their development. They were working towards making this film, getting better every time through their hard work and understanding of the material. The end product was a well-made, polished film that had wide appeal. It was intelligent, fun, different and interesting. It broke new ground but also had its roots in simple, classic storytelling. The 2016 version had none of that. The director had nothing of note behind him. If you look at his history, you can see that he's only managed a few hit and miss films that were sort of comedies that just failed to connect with the audience. Mostly he's just worked on a handful of television shows. The difference was that the original director had a love for the work, where Paul Feig was just crawling along, trying to make a name for himself. The writer, too, had only turned out a handful of hit and miss things. The cast were known more for their failures than their successes. So, to make this work, we needed to assemble a team that's equal to the original one. We need a group of comedy geniuses who have worked together before, and have on-screen chemistry. We need a director who is still young enough to take risks, but has a clear and proven track record that shows they're ready for this challenge. We need to get quality people together at every level. This thing seems slapped together like a fast food burger. The whole production screams of misplaced hubris. The entire cast and production team just seem totally out of their depth, and are intimidated by the gigantic shoes they've somehow managed to get the opportunity to walk in. It feels like seeing a picture of the Mona Lisa with a small hand-drawn version next to it that a child has made in crayon. You can't create a quality product without quality ingredients. It's like an attempt at producing beef Wellington with a Tesco horse burger and a pack of ramen noodles. The next problem goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. The film simply lacks that magic ingredient that made the original so very special in the hearts and minds of the audience, and it's something sorely missing in modern productions.
Ow!
Originality. Ghostbusters was original, it was a brand new concept and it worked well because it was something we'd never seen before. These were a bunch of relatable, but slightly eccentric characters who seemed just like any other working Joes. They used cobbled together equipment, to a horrifyingly incompetent degree, to eliminate ghosts. It was a great concept and it resonated successfully with the audience. The entire idea was funny, right from the start. It's a lot like RoboCop, from the same era. It was a parody of the kind of action films it stood shoulder to shoulder with. It made jokes about the world around it in clever and subtle ways. Then, it was remade by Hollywood, by people who really hadn't understood the original source material. The end product looked like it had escaped out the back door of a low-level video rental shop. It was a disaster because the originality was gone. It was just a pale imitation. It's the same with Ghostbusters 2016. It simply can't be original because it's totally relying on selling due to the established name of the brand it's copying. In Ghostbusters or RoboCop, there would likely have been no sales at all, if it hadn't been for curious and nostalgic people going to see what they'd done to their favorite movies. So, how could they have made it original? The only way would have been to create something truly new. It could have still been a homage to the movie it was trying to emulate, but it needed to be so different that it could stand up as a unique product. First, we have to assemble our team. Well, instead of making them work together, how about we give them a different motivation? Let's have them doing community service while on parole. That gives us a unique way of putting them together, it gives them an edgy, interesting backstory and makes perfect sense of why they're all female. Let's put them in a fish out of water story, let's put them in the sewers, because their parole officer likes making their lives difficult. At this point, the jokes are writing themselves. They can make a discovery down there, something scary and awful that threatens the whole city, such as mutated creatures. Nobody believes them, so they have no choice but to bring their unique personalities to bear, in order to solve the problem. We take the story beats of the original, we take the ideas that work, and we could strike out with a totally new movie that doesn't need to share its name. We could have made a film that actually took what works about the original and used it to inspire something new, instead of just latching a talentless copy to the name of a superior production. So these are just a few ideas of how to take a disaster, and make something that might work out of it. What went wrong with this movie is a lack of direction. It was made by people who only cared about making a name for themselves, and had no interest in the art of the film they were making. The cast didn't work, they just shouted over one another, all trying to get more attention. It was just painful to watch because these people had no chemistry and no interest in what they were doing. It was just a childish and cynical shoving match for career progression, at the expense of the audience. It needed characters that worked, people who felt real and appealed to the entire audience. It needed a story that knew what it wanted to be and engaged with people both intellectually and emotionally. It needed enough originality to be able to do its own thing, and it needed to know who it was aimed at. And, finally, it needed a director who didn't insult his audience. Paul Feig attacked the critics by accusing them of sexism. Tim Miller did the same with Terminator Dark Fate, as did the production team of Star Wars and the gloriously disastrous Charlie's Angels reboot that nobody asked for. In all of these cases, the studio put out an inferior product and then insulted the audience for not liking it. It's a childish tactic and it has ruined franchises. At least Tim Miller had the good grace to admit he'd misread the audience and admitted he had been wrong. These people need to remember that these movies are made for the audience, their products belong to them, not to the studios. The buying public is reminding them of that now and they might be waking up to it. We'll see. So Ghostbusters was a glorious mess. It looked like you were watching a movie after being pepper sprayed and hit in the head with a beanbag fired from a shotgun. But it didn't need to be. All it needed was the freedom to express itself in a unique way, and to be made by competent artists. Hollywood has become nothing more than a cynical exercise in making money, while driving its own politics. Get back to making movies people like, or it will all soon be over. We need competent directors, brave producers who are willing to take risks, we need actors with their own personalities, and we need stories with real vision. We don't need Paul Feig, who actively insults women by using them as a novelty tactic to advance his career, and then attacks his audience for seeing through it. What I need is to defrag my network. Most of the fragging comes from watching crap like this anyway. Unfortunately, it's my job, and I can't imagine another reason why anyone else would see it. So, that's my opinion, for what it's worth. I'm going to search the internet and find out if digital chocolate is a thing. Goodbye for now, and remember, I don't care about you, not even a little bit.